Imagine waking up one morning with the eerie sensation that your entire life has been staged, not in the theatrical sense of bright curtains and painted sets, but as if invisible hands had arranged every decision for you. You rise from bed, you open your wardrobe, you sip your coffee, and in every gesture echoes a question you cannot easily silence. Whose life am I really living? You tell yourself you chose this career, this city, this set of relationships. But pause, actually pause, and trace every decision backwards. That degree you pursued, was it truly a hunger that burned in your chest? Or did it resemble more the weight of your parents' nods, their subtle sighs of approval or disapproval? That outfit you chose this morning, was it stitched out of your own sense of self, or woven from the threads of what others signaled would make you fit in? Even the way you smile in photographs, is it yours? Or is it a performance delicately calibrated to satisfy invisible judges who never clap, never leave, but always watch? How many steps do you take in a day that are not truly your own, but rather borrowed from the unspoken expectations of strangers, family, lovers, society? And perhaps more unsettling, if we remove those borrowed steps, how many authentic steps remain? It is here that a paradox opens before you like a trapdoor. We claim freedom, we dream of autonomy, we preach individuality, yet nearly every action is haunted by the shadow of, what will they think of me? Our so-called independence often turns out to be nothing more than an elaborate choreography to other people's silent music. Consider the contradictions. You long to express yourself, yet you tailor your expression to a hidden algorithm of approval. You crave authenticity, yet edit your personality in real time to match the expectations of the situation. You remind yourself, almost defiantly, that you are your own person. And yet, the very need to remind yourself hints that something is out of place. And here lies the great question, lurking like a riddle that tightens the more you wrestle with it. If the self you present is built from the demands, judgments, and dreams of others, do you possess a self at all? Or are you merely an actor in a story authored by everyone except you? Sit with that. Let it pinch your nerves. Because what follows is not comfort, but confrontation. Picture this. A man in his 40s wakes up one day in a sleek apartment, sipping expensive coffee, preparing for a high-paying job he secretly despises. Everyone around him admires his accomplishments. His parents boast, his colleagues envy, his friends respect. And yet, in a quiet moment between phone calls, he feels nothing but hollowness. He has lived for admiration. He has lived for stability. He has lived for everything except himself. When he asks what he truly wants, he realizes he cannot answer. His desires have fossilized into a museum of borrowed ambitions. Or imagine a young woman endlessly scrolling through images of extraordinary lives. Adventurers, influencers, thinkers, achievers. And in every scroll, she molds her identity around what will make her appear equally extraordinary. Not extraordinary for herself, but extraordinary in the eyes of that faceless audience that both never cares and always matters. These are not remote case studies. They are mirror reflections. They are you. They are me. They are almost everyone caught in a silent contract signed long ago. The contract to live under the gaze of others. But why do we keep signing? Why do we dim our strange and luminous truths just to chase borrowed lights? Why does the applause of others sound so much louder than the whisper of our own being? And here is the paradox that slices us in two. To become what others want, we betray ourselves. Yet to betray others' expectations, we fear becoming irrelevant, unloved, cast aside. If every victory is for someone else, is it even a victory? If every smile is painted for the gallery, who remembers how to smile when the gallery is empty? These questions do not ask for tidy answers, not yet. They are meant to unsettle, to darken the room of your certainty so a sliver of authentic light might appear. Because here is the truth you already sense, deep in your restless bones. Something enormous and unnamed is shaping your choices, suffocating your freedom. bending you into a shape that was never truly yours. And you cannot resist something until you finally see it. This is where the journey begins, not in the promise of immediate liberation, but in the haunting awareness that what you call your life may not yet be yours at all. And so, let's descend. Let us walk deeper into the roots of this inheritance, into the subterranean soil where expectations are planted. Let us ask not only how heavy the chains feel, but who forged them, and why we carry them as though they were jewelry. The stage is set, not for comfort, but for revelation. The hidden problem and its psychological, philosophical roots. You have felt it, that silent pressure wrapping itself around your body like an invisible corset. You breathe, but never fully. You move, but always carefully. You express yourself, but always trimmed at the edges. If the first realization was that you are not free, the second realization is crueler still. The prison you inhabit may not have been built by others, but by you. How? Why would you walk into your own cage and slide the locks shut? Psychologists call it social conditioning. Philosophers describe it as the burden of the gaze. But in plain terms, it is this. You were born into a theater where the play had already begun, with a script littered with centuries of expectations. Parents unconsciously hand you a mask before they hand you a name. Teachers adjust your posture. Employers refine your smile. Partners nudge your desires. Slowly, what was once spontaneous in you begins to be tamed, and the child's raw cry of, "I want," transforms into the adult's hesitant, endlessly negotiated, "Will they approve?" Carl Jung would have called this the dominance of the persona, the mask we present to the world in order to belong. A mask can protect us, yes. It can make society's machinery smoother. But Jung warned that the mask, if mistaken for the face, suffocates the soul. You start believing the smile is real. You forget the wild, terrifying face underneath. And when you forget too completely, the inner life retaliates, through emptiness, through depression, through a haunting sense of something's wrong, even when everything externally looks right. Nietzsche railed against this with fierce poetry. He named it herd morality, the tendency of individuals to dilute their own will so thoroughly that they dissolve into the crowd's opinion of what is good, what is proper, what is valuable. Nietzsche's great cry was not simply to free oneself from others, but to birth a self so intensely alive that it would terrify conformity. Yet Nietzsche also acknowledged just how magnetic the herd can be. The paradox that in fleeing the loneliness of radical freedom, people willingly surrender to chains. The roots snake deeper still. Consider Schopenhauer's grim observation. At the core of human existence is an endless striving, an insatiable will that is never satisfied. If this blind will is our condition, then perhaps aligning ourselves with external expectations feels easier than sitting in the raw storm of our own desires. Better to chase the next promotion that wins applause than confront the terrifying question, what do I actually want? Because the answer, if it even exists, might reveal a void we are unwilling to face. Even Sartre, that stern French architect of existentialism, pointed to bad faith, the self-deception by which we pretend we are bound by roles, father, employee, citizen, lover, because pretending the role is our identity feels safer than wrestling with true freedom. Roles come with scripts. Freedom comes with nothing but silence and the burden of writing one's own. This is why the prison feels paradoxically comforting. You may be trapped, yes, but at least you are given instructions. You know what to wear, how to speak, when to laugh, who to become. And in exchange for obedience, you are granted the illusion of belonging. It is a devil's contract. Sacrifice your authenticity in exchange for applause. But applause is fickle. It vanishes the moment the lights dim. We must dig deeper into the psychology. There is a primal reason why we fear rejection so violently that we distort ourselves into caricatures of acceptability. Evolution wired us to attach survival to approval. For most of human history, exile from the tribe was not symbolic, it was mortal. To be cast out meant to die alone in the wilderness. Our nervous systems still carry that ancient terror. When a boss frowns, when friends laugh at us, when society labels us strange, our body reacts as though a predator were stalking. Shame, guilt, social anxiety, they are not silly neuroses. They are ancient survival alarms. And so, we bend, we imitate, we submit. Each compromise, small at first, becomes habitual. By adulthood, many cannot distinguish which preferences are actually theirs and which are borrowed. Did you pursue medicine because you longed to heal, or because the prestige fit neatly into your family's dream? Do you laugh at that joke because you find it funny, or because silence might have marked you as an outsider? Even the style of your handwriting, was it corrected by teachers enough times that it no longer resembles the one you would have chosen? This is not harmless. When expectations colonize your identity, you start losing the ability to feel direct contact with your own life. Experience itself becomes mediated by how it will be seen. A sunset becomes a photo op. A thought becomes a performance. Love becomes a transaction. Slowly, you find yourself estranged from the simple, wordless pulse of existence. And this estrangement is not just private suffering. It scales up into society. The workforce overflows with people chasing careers they disdain but tolerate for validation. Relationships disintegrate because individuals enter them not as free selves, but as fabricated roles. Even politics becomes theater, a stage where leaders shout what audiences demand to hear, rather than what they themselves truly know or believe. At every level, the false self replaces the living one. But the deepest danger, perhaps the one Jung feared most, is not mere unhappiness, but psychic disintegration. When the authentic self is too long buried, it doesn't simply vanish, it festers. It roars from the shadows of the unconscious, manifesting as neuroses, addictions, sudden breakdowns, or quiet despair. The midlife crisis is misunderstood. It is not merely boredom with adulthood, but the rebellion of a self that can no longer tolerate suffocation. So here is the bitter root unmasked. The prison of other people's expectations is not sustained primarily by others, but by our own collusion, our own evolutionary fear of rejection, our own philosophical dread of freedom. We would rather be defined by others than endure the abyss of defining ourselves. And yet, the irony strikes like a cruel joke. By refusing the abyss, we live permanently in one. This realization is terrifying. You may feel the floor tilt beneath you as you consider it. But terror is often the birthplace of clarity. For the first time, you can see the mechanics of the trap. The herd, the persona, the bad faith, the survival instinct that chains the spirit to borrowed scripts. The question now sharpens. If we are so deeply wired to surrender ourselves, if philosophy itself has shown us why conformity feels inevitable, then what unseen consequences arise from continuing the charade? What life-shaping costs are we already paying without recognizing them? This is where the descent takes us next, into the domain of consequences so insidious that we stumble through them unknowing, as if walking blindfolded through our own fate. The unseen consequences. Up until now, the prison may have sounded abstract, philosophy, psychology, theory. But prisons are never abstract for the prisoner. They are concrete, cold iron bars, aching bones, the metallic taste of lost time. And in this particular prison, the one woven from the threads of other people's expectations, the consequences seep into every corner of your lived reality. You may not see the chains, but you feel the bruises. The first, and perhaps most obvious consequence, is the quiet erosion of desire. Think carefully. When was the last time you felt a surge of longing that seemed unmistakably your own? Not a polite preference, not a socially acceptable hobby, but the kind of raw desire that seems to rise like fire from the stomach, demanding, unnegotiable. For many, it has been years. When you spend your life editing yourself to match others' scripts, your original language of desire begins to fade, like a forgotten dialect. Eventually, you find yourself unable to distinguish if you actually want something, or if you just want to be seen wanting it. This bleeds into the second consequence: chronic dissatisfaction. Our nervous systems evolved to reward us when we pursue authentic goals, goals that resonate with our individual impulses and needs. But when you pursue goals installed by others, the brain does not release the satisfaction you expect. You climb the mountain, wave the flag, and yet instead of triumph, you feel emptiness. Think of the corporate executive who achieves the corner office only to collapse into despair, or the student who wins top honors yet stares at the award as though it were written in a language they no longer understand. This emptiness is not failure. It is the body's way of telling you, you reached the wrong summit. Then comes psychological dissonance. Cognitive scientists call it self-discrepancy theory. The more distance there is between your actual self, who you are, and your ought self, who you think others expect you to be, the more your nervous system rattles with stress, anxiety, and depression. Living under expectations is thus not merely emotionally unpleasant, it is physiologically corrosive. Cortisol, the stress hormone, lingers in your bloodstream like slow poison. Over time, this internal civil war becomes visible. Headaches, insomnia, fatigue, perhaps even illness. The body does not lie, even when the lips do. Another consequence often hides in plain sight: relationships built entirely on masks. When you relate through the borrowed self, the persona, as Jung described, then the bonds you form are never bonds of authenticity. They are contracts between masks. Two people show up to dinner, but neither of them actually arrives. Instead, two curated avatars negotiate, flatter, and conceal. Such relationships can last for years, even decades, but deep down, both parties know what is missing. Intimacy requires two authentic selves meeting without armor. Yet tragically, many couples never let those selves out of hiding, even from one another. And then comes society's most effective tool of control: status games. Entire industries thrive on this prison: advertising, luxury branding, social media. They promise identity through products, belonging through aesthetics, worth through comparison. The prison is not only maintained, it is monetized. Social platforms, for instance, train dopamine circuits in your brain to salivate at likes and views, hijacking evolutionary instincts for approval into a perpetual slot machine of worth. The silent tragedy. You are not simply shaped by others' expectations. You are exploited for profit by them. Consider the consequence in education. How many young people shuffle through decades of schooling, their natural curiosities suffocated by the weight of what looks impressive, what pays well, what dad approves of. By 25, they are burnt out. By 35, they wake from a fog, realizing they have never genuinely known what they love, only what they should pursue. And by then, debts and responsibilities make backtracking nearly impossible. The prison has institutionalized itself. The consequences extend into politics and culture too. When leaders exist only to echo popular expectations, they become hollow vessels. What emerges is a society allergic to authenticity, where the loudest voices are often the most calculated. Public discourse becomes performance, outrage becomes currency, and truth becomes irrelevant unless it polls well. The prison replicates itself at the level of civilization, until entire nations march not toward genuine vision, but toward the echo chamber of perceived approval. Now imagine the long timeline. A life lived solely under expectation accumulates not just moments of discomfort, but decades of regret. Viktor Frankl, who endured the extremities of concentration camps, once said that life's final task is not success or happiness, but meaning. Yet how many die without ever facing meaning because their entire existence was one long rehearsal for an audience whose applause fades anyway? On the deathbed, no one wishes they had received more likes, earned more diplomas, or matched outfits more perfectly to the mood of the crowd. The common lament is simpler, heavier. I did not live my own life. And if we dare peer even deeper, we encounter the most haunting consequence of all: the loss of the self itself. Not metaphorically, literally. Neurological research suggests that repeated suppression of one's own impulses and authentic preferences leads to weakening of neural pathways associated with self-directed motivation. In other words, the longer you suppress the self, the harder it becomes to remember that it exists at all. Critics of conformity are not just waxing poetic when they warn of soul death. Modern neuroscience confirms, starve an impulse long enough, and the brain itself rewires to erase it. The prison becomes not just psychological, it becomes neurological. And so, here we stand, a society of hollow smiles, obedient careers, anxious sleep patterns, empty victories, shallow relationships, political theater, neurological scars. The consequences are not out there, but already humming in your bloodstream, already echoing in your late-night thoughts. Now the question sharpens like a blade at your throat. If the prison of expectation costs us desire, health, love, authenticity, and even the self itself, why do we remain here? The answer, as strange as it sounds, is that the locks on the cage are not as unbreakable as they appear. Indeed, in many ways, the door has always been slightly ajar. The rebellion is possible, but the hardest step is not unlocking the bars, it is daring to step through them. The rebellion will not be polite. It will not be gentle. It requires declaring war against the very instincts that tell you to obey. It requires shattering masks, even when they are all you've ever known. It requires finding the courage to become alarming to others, uncomfortable to the herd, even terrifying at first to yourself. And it begins here, in the next descent, not with resignation, but with insurgency. The question is not merely, what are the consequences of the prison? You've seen those plainly by now. The question is, what does it mean to break free? The rebellion, how to break free. To revolt against the prison of expectations is not a gentle pastime. It is a war declared quietly in your own chest. Do not imagine it as a clean escape, like someone offering you keys and wishing you luck. Imagine instead ripping out the floorboards of a house you never chose, fire roaring through the walls, neighbors staring at you in confusion. To break free is not to be applauded, at least not at first. It is to disturb, to unsettle, to refuse the choreography that everyone around you insists is dance. But perhaps we should begin smaller, closer. The rebellion does not start with grand speeches or daring escapades. It begins with a single, shocking act: honesty. Ask yourself in unvarnished sincerity, what do I want? Then sit there. Do not rush to answer, because the first replies will not be truly yours. They will be echoes. I want success. I want admiration. I want to make others proud. Yes, perhaps, but peel that away. Ask again and again. Like peeling an onion, tears may rise as you uncover layer after layer of borrowed desire. Eventually, the voice you find may be quieter, less glamorous, not easily shareable on social media. It might whisper something strange, unruly, even embarrassing. I want to paint badly. I want to live in stillness. I want to wander aimlessly. I want to love recklessly. I want to sit in silence. I want less, not more. Rebellion often looks unimpressive to anyone else, but to you, it feels like breathing for the first time. Of course, honesty alone is not enough. You must practice the ancient art of disappointing others. This is perhaps the most taboo form of freedom. Society trains you to avoid it at all costs. We live in terror of those words. I'm disappointed in you. They burn more deeply than direct insults. But disappointment is nothing more than evidence that you are choosing differently. And what greater proof of rebellion could exist than someone else sighing that you've broken the script? History offers luminous examples. Think of Socrates, who disappointed the entire city of Athens by refusing to stop questioning, even when it cost him his life. Or Rosa Parks, who disappointed the social structure of segregation by refusing to stand. Or Kierkegaard, who disappointed his family and the Danish church establishment by withdrawing into solitary writing, birthing existentialism in the process. Every figure who shifted humanity carried a title long before hero: disappointment. Your rebellion will not always be recognized on such grand scales. Sometimes it is refusing the career path chosen for you. Sometimes it is ending a relationship that feels more like performance than intimacy. Sometimes it is admitting aloud that you no longer share the beliefs your family raised you within. Sometimes it is something smaller, turning off your phone for a day without explanation. Rebellion is scalable, but always disruptive. Still, we must be cautious. Rebellion is not license for reckless narcissism. Breaking free does not mean stomping on everyone else with, "It's just me being authentic." Freedom has nothing in common with cruelty. The task is not to become enslaved to one more expectation, your own petty whims, but to discover what emerges when expectations fall silent. As Viktor Frankl pointed out, freedom is only half the equation. The other half is responsibility. The authentic life is not the selfish life. It is the life rooted in meaning. Here is the paradox. By first turning away from others' demands, you clear the ground to discover a kind of action that serves others more profoundly than obedience ever could. Nietzsche called this the yes-saying spirit, the figure who, after tearing down the herd's morality, births new values luminous enough to inspire others. Jung described the process as individuation, the integration of the hidden self, making you whole enough to offer wholeness to others. But what does rebellion look like on the ground, in the daily rhythms? Radical self-inquiry, journal with ferocity, question why every choice you make is the one you make. Before you eat, before you agree, before you commit, pause. Is this truly mine, or am I borrowing this desire from someone else's shelf? Writing forces clarity, exposes lies you tell yourself. Micro acts of defiance. Begin where risk feels manageable. Say no to a social invitation you'd normally accept out of obligation. Wear something that reflects how you feel, not how you fear being judged. Speak a truth in conversation that makes the room fall silent. These are rehearsal fires. You build muscle gradually to withstand larger blazes. Constructive solitude. Learn to be alone without panic. Sartre warned of the gaze of others defining us. Solitude strips the gaze away, at least temporarily. In quiet solitude, the authentic self, long silenced, re-emerges timidly. Guard that space. Reframe fear of rejection. See disapproval as evidence, not failure. If you are never rejected, you have never truly rebelled. Let rejection sting, yes, but learn to stand tall in its sting, as if wearing the bruise proudly. It means you are alive to yourself again. Seek exemplars. Surround yourself with others who defy. Read their works, listen to their stories, let their spirit spark yours. Freedom loves company, not the company of conformity, but the fellowship of fellow rebels. Through these practices, you craft a life less dependent on applause, more resonant with authenticity. Yet be warned, it does not get easier overnight. To rebel is to grieve. You grieve the imagined lives you built solely to impress others. You grieve relationships that collapse when you refuse the mask. You grieve identities you carried so long they seemed natural. This grief is the smoke of burning fictions. Let it burn. And then, one morning, you may feel something unexpected, an unfamiliar quiet, not absence, but spaciousness. For once, you are not anxiously curating your expression for the world's gaze. You are simply there, presence unadorned. And in that silence, something extraordinary arises. Self-respect, the kind of respect that no applause can touch. It is addictive in the most sacred sense. Once you've tasted it, you realize what you had mistaken for freedom before was only obedience delivered with fancy packaging. Now you know, rebellion is the real beginning of freedom. And yet, even here, something still stirs. Breaking free is not the end. It is a threshold, a clearing. What lies ahead is not simply the absence of chains, but the discovery of something more astonishing. A truth so deep it reframes not only your personal life, but the entire meaning of existence. The rebellion clears the forest. The next stage is the mountain beyond the trees. And upon that peak waits a final, seismic realization, one that renders all chains laughably thin, all fears laughably small. Brace yourself. The ultimate truth is coming. The ultimate truth, the final, most powerful realization. So here we are. We have traced the cage, named the roots, felt the consequences, and lit the spark of rebellion. But rebellion, while exhilarating, is still defined by its opposition. If you define yourself only by what you are breaking free from, then you remain forever tethered, your existence nothing more than a shadow play cast by the very prison you sought to escape. True liberation requires something else, something higher, a revelation not bound to defiance, but to essence. The ultimate truth whispers through the silence once rebellion has cleared the noise. You are not here to perform, you are here to be. It sounds simple, almost childlike, yet it undermines the entire architecture of the prison. To perform is to calculate. How am I being seen? Am I meeting their standard? Will this grant approval? But to be is to settle into existence without negotiation. The tree does not ask if it grows straight enough. The ocean does not wonder if its waves are applauded. The sun does not worry if its light is too bright or too dim. They simply are. And in their being, they embody a freedom far greater than any rebellion. But for humans, being has always been concealed beneath layers of expectation. You were taught from the first day to confuse being with becoming. Become successful, become respectable, become likable. You were rarely told, simply be. And so life becomes an endless chase, a becoming that never arrives. The rebellion, then, creates the space where a deeper truth can surface. You never had to become at all. You already are. This realization is nothing less than a vertical collapse of illusion. The weight you felt all those years, the exhausting work of curating yourself for other people's eyes, was never necessary. Their expectations are shadows cast upon a wall. The self, uncovered, is light itself. The great philosophers, in their own language, circled this truth like moths around a flame. Nietzsche spoke of creating values. Yes, but beneath that is the raw, unrepeatable pulse of your being, which does not need justification. Sartre spoke of radical freedom. Yes, but freedom only bites when you confuse it for infinite choices. Real freedom is not a buffet of options. It is the effortless dignity of presence. Viktor Frankl wrote of meaning as humanity's ultimate lifeline, and he was right. But meaning is rarely manufactured. It radiates naturally from being once masks are burned away. The trap of expectations made you believe that you were small, insufficient, unworthy unless polished to impress others. The revelation is this: the authentic self does not require improvement. It requires recognition. Now, pay attention here, because this is where many stumble. They hear, "Be yourself," and reduce it to a slogan of shallow individualism. I like this style, this music, this career, therefore I am authentic. No, being is not style. It is not preference. It is not identity. Those are costumes too. Being is the felt reality that, below the roles, below the histories, below the borrowed ambitions, there is a thrum of aliveness that asks for nothing but acknowledgement. This is the paradoxical core of the ultimate truth. You have nothing to prove, not one thing. Not to strangers, not to family, not to friends, not even to yourself. The performance is over, the lights dim, and in the darkness, you feel what was waiting all along. The unpressured pulse of existence saying simply, I am. And from this realization flows a staggering consequence, the kind that reframes every choice, every fear, every moment. If you no longer need approval, then every action becomes clean. You can love, not because you want love in return, but because love radiates from you like sun from a star. You can create, not because you hunger for applause, but because creation is the natural overflow of being. You can even suffer, and yes, suffering still comes. But when you suffer authentically, without mask or performance, even pain becomes strangely bearable. It is not humiliation, nor shame. It is simply the texture of living. The chains of expectation break not with violence, but with irrelevance. What can they demand of you once you know you are already enough? They can no longer maneuver your life like a puppet master, because your strings have dissolved. You see it clearly now. Their applause, their disapproval, their smirks, their glares, they are weather, passing clouds. The mountain does not kneel to the sky. The sky shifts around the mountain. To touch this truth is to gain a calm more radical than any rebellion. And yet, it does not make you passive. There is great misunderstanding here. People fear that if they stop pleasing others, they will become stagnant, lazy, nihilistic. The opposite is true. When the false weights are lifted, when you stop carrying 1,000 borrowed identities, your energy surges back to you. The exhaustion was never from life itself. It was from the performance. Now, the vitality reserved for survival theater flows back into creation, courage, intimacy, and wonder. It is like realizing you have been clenching your fists for decades without knowing it. The moment you release, blood floods back into your hands, and suddenly, you remember what aliveness feels like. And from this aliveness, one final realization rises like dawn. You were never as alone as you feared. For all along, everyone else is imprisoned too, chained by expectation, gasping beneath masks. When you dare to step into being, you become a beacon, not of performance, but of possibility. Your very presence becomes permission for others. If they can shed the prison, someone whispers inside themselves as they watch you, perhaps I can too. Thus, your authenticity ripples outward, freeing more than yourself. This is the secret destiny of liberation. The moment you stop performing, you make space for others to stop as well. And isn't that the deepest rebellion? An epidemic of authenticity spreading like wildfire through a world built on masks? So let us close with the only words fitting for such a truth. Words not of instruction, but of invocation. Imagine yourself standing on a cliff at sunrise. The horizon burns with fire, the world below still asleep in shadows. You feel the weight fall away, the ghostly eyes of critics, the endless demands, the suffocating roles. They dissolve like mist. And you, standing there, realize there was never anything to fix, never anything to prove. You were always free. You simply forgot. And as that realization anchors, the prison collapses behind you, not demolished, but irrelevant, because you need no longer enter it. You have stepped into the only freedom that ever mattered, the freedom to be. Carry this not as a slogan, not as an idea, but as a lived practice. In every conversation, in every choice, in every silence, remember, you are not here to audition for a world that never had the authority to judge you. You are here to live, fully, strangely, luminously, authentically. The prison dissolves, the chains scatter, and you, at last, walk out into the raw strangeness of existence, belonging not to others, but to yourself.